What's going on, everybody? I'm Average Joe and welcome to another Average video. Alrighty, in today's Average video, this is going to be video 2 or episode 2 of the EG4 GRIDBOSS and FLEXBOSS21 installation. However, this video is only going to be installing the FLEXBOSS21. We're going to do the GRIDBOSS in another video or 2. And as always, I'm going to try to make this video as short and sweet as I possibly can without any extra fluff. However, keep in mind, my videos are typically longer because I try to show you as much detail as I possibly can so you can be confident enough to install your own inverter. Of course, that just goes right into the disclaimer that I'm supposed to say is this is how I'm doing it. If you're not comfortable with doing electrical work or anything like that, seek professional advice from a qualified electrician. All right, a few things before we get started is if you're not familiar with the GRIDBOSS or the FLEXBOSS21 is, I have a whole nother video basically explaining everything and what they do. I will link that down below. I'm not gonna spend all that time and go through all that in this video. The next thing is I do currently have the 12,000 watt Lux Power hybrid inverter. It's basically the non-EG4 brand of the 18 kPV. I am using that currently, so I am gonna have to remove that and I am going to show you or document the process. And then I'm also going to give you just a quick little rundown or explanation of how I have everything wired and how everything is going to be wired whenever we install it. All right, so for the installation of the FLEXBOSS21, I have a couple notes here so I don't forget, is the first thing is gonna be your wiring. Of course, if you don't have an inverter already connected up like I do, you're gonna need some wiring. The wiring that you can use for the FLEXBOSS21 is copper wire, and you can use up to 2 AWG with a 90 amp circuit breaker. And just a little side note, the wiring that I have over there is not 2 AWG. It is 6 AWG. It is the T90 THHN. That just means I can go up to a higher current. And I have a 60 amp circuit breaker back there from my main electrical panel, and I'm going to continue using that for right now until I install the GRIDBOSS right over here. Once I do that, then I'm gonna swap some of that wiring out to the 2 AWG. Next one is the battery cables, and you can use 1/0 to 4/0. The battery cables that I have over there right now are 2/0, and I'm probably just going to continue using 2/0 wire. For the PV wire, it says 10 to 6 AWG, and I'm pretty sure most of my wiring that I have over there right now is 10, and I think a couple might be 12, but those are going to get swapped out later. I'm going to be using 10 AWG for all of my solar or PV runs. And another little side note for that is you don't have to use strictly PV wire. You can use THHN wire. That's what I have over there. Basically what you want to do is use THHN wire in all of your inside or indoor runs because it's cheaper. And then anything that is outside, you can switch over to the PV wire because it's typically UV rated and stuff like that. THHN wire is not, UV rated and all that kind of stuff. And another thing on that is if you're trying to be a little more code compliant and maybe you want to get inspected and all that kind of stuff, all of your PV wire that goes inside of a building has to be inside of a metal raceway, which could be a metal box, EMT conduit, or the flexible metal conduit, which I actually have over there installed right now. Other things that you're going to need for your installation, of course, is a drill, preferably a hammer drill. If you're going into concrete like I'm doing, you're going to need concrete bits. You're going to need Allen wrenches of some sort, wire cutters, maybe a couple flathead screwdrivers, maybe an adjustable wrench, something like this, and a multimeter so you can check voltages and stuff like that to make sure it doesn't go boom. And finally, one last thing, just as a reminder only, if you're watching this video in 2025, not to put any sort of extra pressure on you or anything like that, but this is the last year for the 30% tax credit. So if you've been thinking about getting a battery backup system or solar or just a system in general, this is the time to get that stuff on order because at least at this time, you're not going to get any more tax credits after that. And of course, if you want to save some cash, I'm going to have discount codes and affiliate links to Signature Solar and a few other places that I recommend. Of course, the discount code and affiliate links are not required, but they're always appreciated because I do get a small commission from that, which supports the channel. And well, that's how I pay my bills. Alrighty, enough talk. let's get to it. All right, to get this started, what I'm gonna need to do first is I'm gonna have to remove the 12,000 watt Lux Power hybrid inverter. This is basically an 18 kPV. It's just the non-EG4 version. And I also need to remove the EG4 6000 XP just so I can get a little bit more room. And then we're going to install the FLEXBOSS21 in the 18 kPV's place. Later on down the line, I'm either going to get another FLEXBOSS21 and put it right down there below, or it'd be cool if I could parallel this in once I have the GRIDBOSS installed, but we'll come to that point later on. Anyway, this might be somewhat of a task because everything is going to be really heavy, but I do have the little hydraulic cart that'll help me lift everything up and remove everything. If you don't have one of those, I would highly suggest it. Or you could do the sketchy way I did it with the old grow-watt inverter I had, is I did it with all pulleys and stuff like that. It works, it was just really sketchy. The rest of it's going to be somewhat easy because, as you can see, I already have this wired up. I don't really have to do anything extra for that. So for your installation, could take just a little bit longer because obviously once you get the inverter hung on the wall, you're going to have to do all of your wiring from there, either through like a conduit box or just conduit like I have right here. Next, I was just going to give you a quick little explanation of how I have this wired currently and how the FlexBoss is going to be wired for the time being until I get the GRIDBOSS installed. Currently, right now, off of my main electrical panel, I have all the wiring coming over into the grid port on the inverter. And then for the inverter output, I have that going to a separate sub panel that's basically right next to my main electrical panel. Now, the reason I did it that way is because I used to have a 12,000 watt split phase grow-watt inverter right over here, and that was an off-grid inverter. And that was the easiest way for me to wire it because I didn't have a lot of solar, I didn't have a lot of battery at the time, and I couldn't keep up with my air conditioning, stove, and dryer, especially if the power went out. So having said that, when the power went out, basically I could power like 90% of my home minus my stove, air conditioning, and dryer. And then whenever I got the 18 kPV right here, I just removed the grow-watt and then did the exact same thing as we're gonna do today, is reinstall the inverter, and I just wired it the exact same. The reason I wired it the same as the grow-watt is because, again, at that time I didn't have a lot of solar or battery. That kind of just gradually grew over time. And the next thing is, since it's a hybrid inverter, this will actually backfeed into your main electrical panel, and you have a couple of CT monitors that you clamp onto your main wires, and this will actually backfeed into your main electrical panel, and it'll backfeed all the way up to those CT clamps that you have installed. So it won't go any further than those, therefore it won't go back into the grid. So basically what that means is I'm able to power my entire house, only when the grid is available. As soon as grid goes out, this will stop backfeeding my main electrical panel and only power the sub panel, which was 90% of my house. Once I remove this and we install the FlexBoss21, I'm gonna wire it the exact same way for right now until I get the GRIDBOSS installed. Once the GRIDBOSS is installed, I no longer have to have this wired up to my sub panel or anything like that, because this will be wired into the GRIDBOSS, and then from there it'll go to my main electrical panel, and then whatever follows that. So I'll be able to back up my entire house. That might sound a little confusing right now, but once we get into it, it'll make a little bit more sense. So anyway, I need to start removing everything. So step number one is shutting everything down. All right, main electrical panel, sub panel, and I also have a little transfer switch right up here. So we need to switch this over from the 18 kPV over to the EP cube right now. EP cube is on the lower section, or section B, so we'll flip that real quick. That's technically like a grid pass-through as well. Go over here to the main electrical panel and we'll turn off the Lux Power inverter. Boom, so now we don't have any power going to the Lux Power inverter. Back over at the inverter, open this up. Need to turn off the PV. In here we need to turn off the load breaker and the battery breaker. Boom, and then we need to shut down all the batteries. So first one is gonna be the Ethos battery. It's gonna be this breaker right here. Oop, that was just a piece of plastic. Here. next thing we gotta do is check battery voltage and AC voltage. We'll do grid showing 0 for AC, load 0 AC, battery voltage 0.3 volts, which is probably capacitors and stuff like that. So we should be good to go. All right, batteries first. I did forget to check the solar voltage just in case. Oh, that one says 326. I actually need to go outside and turn that one off. 3.5, 3.5. All right, so let me go unhook that real quick. See, that's why you check. Went outside to shut that array off and it's real cloudy out. I think we're supposed to be getting some storms, so it's kind of a perfect time to do this since we won't be getting much solar. Thunderstorms, some may contain locally heavy rain, especially this evening. Gusty winds and small hail are possible. That's later today. So hopefully we can get this done really quick. The other arrays, of course, are shut off through here, but they also have rapid shutdown on them as well, so they shut down. Yes, this one isn't in metal conduit yet. It's all a work in progress, I swear. All right, everything is disconnected. Yes, you will. All right, now I'm going to disconnect all the conduit down here. I'm going to try to hang it out of the way so I can have room to remove this one, but we'll find out. That one is tight all the way to the top. There we go. Whew. Now this one is all glued up, so I do have to pull it out from inside this battery box. Yes, I know I still need to finish this battery. All right, down here, I basically want this to go to the exact same spot or as close as I can get it. This is for the template that we're going to use for the FLEXBOSS. Okay. All right, I'm gonna try something with the handle and a strap because I don't want this to fall over since it's so heavy. I just know that this could potentially fall that way. I hope that this will keep it upright until I get it down far enough to lay it down. I don't know, and I don't want to break off the PV disconnect switch right here either. All right, well, here goes nothing. I think I'm caught already. But what would I be caught on, you ask? I don't know yet. I'm loose. Gosh, this thing is huge. That's what she said. All right, let me get this out of the way. Next thing we got to do is remove the old bracket so we can install the new bracket. Now, if you wanted to see the size difference compared to the 18 kPV or the FLEXBOSS21, it is quite a bit bigger, but it kind of looks like the mounting point is the same for the most part. Yeah, it looks to be about the same. So technically, I could probably mount the FLEXBOSS21 right here, but if I did do that, it would be a little too high and all of my other conduit and all that kind of stuff would not fit. All All right, so right up here is going to be the old mounts from the 18 kPV. I'm going to try to leave those there if I can, just in case later on for some reason I need to swap something around. Next thing we're going to do is mount the FLEXBOSS21, and of course, first thing we're going to need is the template. I did mark the center of the cardboard so I can maybe line up with the center mark up here that I had previously. And then we're also going to line up the bottom with the marks that I made so we can kind of line everything up with where the old conduit and stuff was. So that's what I need to do on the bottom side, just so we're close to that. All right, there is my spot. One hole right here, there, right there. Boom, there we go. All right, so new bracket's gonna go roughly right here, and we can circle this one out too if we want to, but I don't think we really need to. So it looks like I am gonna have to remove those. Damn. Boom. So for the mounting, I'm going to be using the same thing that I used previously, which are the lag bolts that came with the inverter, and these are going to be a 3/8 hole. Changed my mind, I'm not going to use those lag bolts anymore. I am going to use Tapcons that I have on hand, because I looked up the specs for these, and with these right here, they can hold up to like 250 pounds. That's like pulling away from the wall or away from like a ceiling. And then for the shear, which is up and down, it's like 620 pounds. So if I put 4 of these in there for the back bracket, and then of course the 2 side mounts, I think that's gonna be plenty enough. So that's what I'm gonna be using is Tapcons. Yeah, that's going nowhere. All right, got all those tightened down. I'm just gonna check the level real quick, and everything is in between the 2 lines and is perfectly level. And it looks like we're pretty centered with the line that I had previously. Nice. All right, I have the exact same setup. It's actually really stable doing that, and it's not gonna fall towards me, it's gonna wanna fall away from me. So doing it like this actually is working out pretty good. Okay, here we go. I need to let out a little slack, which is scary. Wow, we're like practically there. That was the first try. I just have to go that way, just a smidge, if I can. All right, well that was super easy doing it like that. The only thing I haven't done, of course, is my little side brackets that go, you know, to hold it back to the wall. I don't think I'm actually going to put those on yet, because I want to make sure I can line up all my conduit and stuff that's down here. So I'm gonna start working on this stuff next. Open up the door. All right, so if I put these in here, I can use this size instead of knocking out the big size. That'll be kind of nice. All right, went ahead and knocked out all the knockouts that I need. So we've got a grid input, a inverter output, which is gonna go to my sub panel. Then I got 2 for the batteries, one's for the ethos, and then one's for all the other batteries that I have off to the side. And then I just went ahead and knocked out the solar input right here. All right, now we're going to start wiring everything up into the load and grid connections right here. So I'm going to be using these 2 knockouts right here. And I am using these little bushing adapter things right here as well. I do have these little wrenches right here. You don't really need them, but they're nice to have. Ground first. And I have a cat on my lap now. We could use either one of these 2 PEs or protection earths right here. I'm just gonna go to wherever this kind of seems like it's gonna fit, which will probably be right over here. Okay, of course, I need you off my... Sorry about that jump there. I had a cat on my lap. All right, so of course we always wanna start with the ground. We also need to remove these little plastic covers. Here, let's pop it off. And the size for the Allen wrenches up here for your grid and load, and for the neutral, a number 5 fits perfectly. So this one right here is my grid. All right, L1 is usually black, L2 is typically red. Now there is a torque spec for these, which I'll look in the manual here shortly. You do not want to be a gorilla tightening these down, because you will break them. Now I'm going to work on the load side. Neutral is right back here, and this one likes to sit roughly right here. Alrighty, then our load L1, L2, again same thing, black is typically your L1, red is your L2. And we can put our little plastic covers back on. All right, we have the AC input and output complete. Next, we will work on the battery cables. So this one comes from the Ethos battery. So we do have a communication cable from that one, which I typically don't use at this time right now because that's only got 15 kilowatt on it and it limits my charging. But I will be doing an upgrade to that here real soon. I don't have one of them fancy wrenches for this one. So the size for the battery cable, the number 8 fits perfectly for those. So we got negative on this side, positive on this side. And I am using furls on these because it keeps all the little threads in there all together. Again, there is a torque spec for these. It's in the manual. This one. There we go. We've got the battery cables and the communication cable from those batteries over there. I do use those right now since there's more in capacity. All right, so for the battery communication that we're going to be using, again, like I said, are the batteries over here because there's more in capacity. So the inverter will allow me to use the full solar that I have right now. And that's going to be this top port right up here. You can see up there it says battery communication. And then the other communication we have to run is going to be our CT1 and 2. Those are the clamps that are going to go in your main electrical panel so you don't backfeed into the grid. First one is going to be the battery communication. All right, and then here is our CTs right here. Boom. All right, next is going to be the CT clamps. These are pretty important because they kind of monitor how much power you're coming in from the grid and or if you're trying to push power back out through the grid. These are just little tiny sensors that can read the wattage coming in and out. So these are very important, especially if you're trying to not send power back through the grid. Since we're using a hybrid inverter in a partial home backup right now, these play an important role because we're going to be pulling power from the grid. The hybrid inverter is going to back feed the main electrical panel to try to basically zero it out, okay? So these are the CT clamps in here. These are going to plug in near the battery communication port, and these are the sensors. You're going to get 2 of those right here. One is going to go on L1, the other one is going to go on L2. And also these are labeled CT1 for L1, and then the other one is probably going to say CT2 L2. And these are super easy to put on. You just unclip the little thingy right there, and then you're going to wrap this around your main electrical wires that come in from the grid that is above the main circuit breaker in there. So once you set that in there, you're going to close it. And there is a specific way. As you can see right here, it says PCS with an arrow pointing that's going to be towards your electrical panel. And then on the other side it says grid, that's going to be coming from the grid. For me, I'm actually not going to install these. I am going to attempt to use the ones from the 18 kPV because I believe they are basically the same. All right, so we're back here at my main electrical panel, and I was going to show you the CT clamps that you're going to install. And mine are already installed because they're from the 18 kPV, but this is where you're going to install them. Here's your main circuit breaker. Here's where your L1 and L2 come from the grid. The left is going to be L1. The right is typically going to be L2, okay? And you're going to attach your CT clamps right on those lines that come from the grid, as you can see right here. And these do have a specific way to go in. You can see an L right there and a K on top. And let's see if we can see this one right here. Yeah, there you go. L is on the lower side and it's pointing down. So just make sure you're going to put those in the correct orientation, and that's pretty much all you have to do over here. Last thing is going to be our solar connections. You don't need these little fancy wrenches. They just make it nice. That's all. Okay, so we have our PV ground, which this is only like your metal casing, your metal frames, and all that kind of stuff. Basically, you're bonding all metal together. That's all this is for. It's not lightning protection or anything like that. It's just connecting all the metal cases together. Boom. So we're going to do our PV wires next, and if you can see back there along that back wall, if I can hold these communication cables out of the way, the first 4 are PV1, the next 4 are PV2, and then the next 2 are PV3. So it goes positive, negative, positive, negative. So technically there's a little tiny bus bar, you know, on the first 2 positives and the first 2 negatives, so you can parallel, you know, 2 strings right there, and the same thing for PV2. You can parallel 2 strings right here. You don't need a combiner box or anything like that. And then obviously number 3 is all by itself. Okay, so I do have 2 arrays on the roof that are going to go in PV1, and then another array on the roof that's going to go in PV2, and then I have 1 ground mount that's going to go on PV3. And these are super easy to do. Basically, you're going to get a smaller flathead screwdriver, stick it in the square hole, and then you're going to lift up. We're actually pushing down the connection back there. So all you do is stick in your wire and then let go, and it will clamp down on your PV wire right in there. Okay, here we go. Stick screwdriver in, lift up, put our PV wire in, and let go. Give it a little tug test and you're good to go. Next one over is negative. Tug test, we're good to go. Next one over is positive. Wire in, tug test, good. So the first 4 right here, I have 12 that are Jinko panels, and then I have 12 that are Santan panels. All of those are facing the same direction. PV2 is going to be my Sun Gold power panels, and those are facing a different direction. Those ones are facing east. And I do have all of these marked, so they're nice and easy to read which one's what. And then our PV3. Boom. Done. All right, now that we have everything wired, we're just going to do a quick little recap, which also gives us time to make sure we wired everything correctly. Basically, it's just a double check or a second check. So we're going to start on the left-hand side with the grid. So L1, L2, L1, L2. So black again is typically L1, red is going to be L2. So those are wired correctly. Same thing for the load. L1 is black, L2 is red. And then right back here is going to be our neutral on the neutral bar. And then right here in the center is going to be all of our grounds on the protection earth right here. Move over to the battery cables. Again, negative, positive. Just make sure they're in the correct spot. And then finally our solar panel wires over here. It goes positive, negative, all the way down to the very, very end. And then battery communication, if you're using battery communication. And then lastly is going to be the CT clamps right here. All right, well, that's pretty much it. Looks like everything is wired correctly. I'm going to grab the screen real quick so we can throw that in here so we have something to look at. If you're not familiar with that, it's super, super easy. You pull down these wires right here, and there's one ribbon cable right up here. We're going to pop that right out, and then our ribbon cable is going to come out. And then here's our screen. Set it right there if we can. Hopefully it doesn't come out. And then we just pop this in here. Boom. Super easy. Alrighty, we're at the point where we can turn this on, so it's really exciting and scary all at the same time.
I got that excited, scared feeling. Like 98% excited, 2% scared. It could be 98% scared, 2% excited, but that's what makes it so intense.
Alright, so to turn this on, of course, you're going to flip on your battery circuit breaker over here. And then we're going to turn on the battery switch over there because those have a soft start. We don't want to blow up any capacitors or anything like that. So that's what we're going to do first. Power this on. I'm going to go right over here and turn the batteries on. I'm just going to do that off camera because, well, if something blows up, we'll catch that on camera. But we should see some LED lights turn on right over here and probably the screen. Okie dokie. Here goes battery 1. Turn you on. Okay, I see some lights turn on over there. Just going to start turning on the rest of these batteries. Boom. no explosions, which is nice. All right, so up here we do have a couple LEDs that turned on. So we have normal and warning. Warning is going to be because we don't have the grid breaker turned on quite yet, so that's okay. Good thing is we don't have any faults. All right, taking a closer look at the screen, you can see our notice right over here. That is there because we don't have any grid power right there. Right up here is going to be our solar, which I do not have turned on yet. And then right over here is going to be our battery. We're sitting at 30% state of charge, right at 52 volts. And then right now, since we don't have grid connected, we're on the EPS mode right here, or battery backup. We're not powering anything right now because we don't have that breaker turned on anyway. Okay, so we will just kind of go over here to make sure everything looks good. And I tried to set this up as exactly like the 18 kPV. All right, so use state of charge. We don't have AC charge on. I typically try to put the AC charge power really low, just so I don't charge much from the grid if I ever go to that point, which does happen occasionally. We'll hit the little arrow button, go down. Typically don't do much on this page either. Okay, we'll go to discharge. Operating mode, use state of charge, which is what I want. On-grid cutoff is at 25%. You can put that to whatever you want. A lot of people will put 20%. Off-grid cutoff, that's basically if you're in off-grid mode, like the grid power was out, and you want the inverter to shut down just so you have a little bit of power left. I have mine set on 5%. You can set that to whatever you want. I don't think I have much below that. Yeah, grid peak shaving, I don't do anything with that. Advanced, so PV input, I've got them as all independent. CT, CT1, Modbus, address 1, meter brand, Easton. I didn't really change any of those. The VP startup, that's your solar panel startup. It was set on 200. I just lowered it to 140 volts because that's what the 18 kPV was. I have it on off-grid output, seamless switch, and that's all we have on this page. Those are all of my settings. I didn't change anything in here other than the battery type and the lithium brand. So you're going to change that to whatever protocol batteries you're using. And then on this page, we definitely want to have 0 export enabled because we don't want to send anything back to the grid at all. One other thing that I had to change in here, it was automatically set on share battery. I had to uncheck that one. All right, so what I'm going to do next is flip on the roof solar panels so we can start charging. It's super cloudy out, so I doubt we're going to get much anyway. And then I have to go outside and turn on PV3 because that's on the ground array. All right, ground array is on. And again, it is super, super cloudy out, so we're not getting hardly anything at all. So on array 1, 900 watts, array 2, 500 watts, and then array 3, 400 watts. We're charging at 1.9 kilowatt, which is nothing. Okay, anyway, that's what we have on the screen right there. Oh yeah, I gotta turn on this battery as well. Next thing we can do is go back to my main electrical panel and flip on the circuit breaker so we can supply this with grid power. And also while we're back there, we will flip over my little tiny transfer switch, so if the power does happen to go out, we will use this system and not the EP Cube. EP Cube I kind of leave for last resort right now until I get to GRIDBOSS. Once I get to GRIDBOSS, I'll hook up the EP Cube to that through AC coupling. All right, back here at the main electrical panel, we're gonna go ahead and flip that circuit breaker on. Boom, that one is on. And then right over here for my little transfer switch, we're gonna flip that over to A. Boom, now we're on the FLEXBOSS21. All right, back over here, the warning LED light went away. And if we look at the screen down here, you can see it says normal. And then for the grid, that actually shows up as 245 volts, 59.9 hertz. Nice. All right, since the battery percent state of charge is so low, I'm not gonna really do any sort of testing right now. I kind of want to raise that up. In the meantime, I need to, tidy up some of this extra wiring stuff on the side. That's, again, temporary. I need to put the door back on. I just took that off because it was easier for me to get the camera and myself in there to do everything. And then I'm going to reinstall the 6000 XP down here because I have a small solar panel array on that, so I can get that charging as well. All right, I was gonna give you a quick explanation of how everything is wired back here on my main and sub panel because I didn't show any of that during the video because I already had an inverter hooked up and I already have all the wiring ran. So anyway, if you want to do a partial home backup, which is how I have it wired currently, grid is going to come into my house and into my main electrical panel right here. From my main electrical panel, I am coming out of a 60 amp circuit breaker. If you're doing it correctly, you would use a 90 amp circuit breaker and big wire, but like I said earlier, I already had 6 AWG wires, so that's what I'm going to use until I get the GRIDBOSS. Anyway, I'm coming out of a 60 amp circuit breaker right here, going over to the FLEXBOSS21 on the grid input, and then on the inverter output, I'm actually going over to the sub panel right over here, and I am going through a generator lockout. A generator lockout's probably the cheapest and easiest way to do this because you can only use one source at a time. So if you have this installed, basically you're going to shut off the main power, which is actually supplied from this sub panel circuit breaker right here. These wires go up into the top to feed this panel. But from the inverter, like I just said, that goes into this circuit breaker right here. So we actually shut off the main power to this and then lift up our generator lockout right here and then turn on the circuit breaker. So then the inverter is actually powering everything on this panel, which is again like 90% of my house. The reason again why I did it like that back in the day is because I didn't have a lot of battery and solar. I could not keep up with the stove, air conditioning, and dryer, which all of those again are on this panel right here. I've got my air conditioning, I got my stove, I got my dryer. Basically all the big loads are on this panel right over here. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if the grid ever shuts down, you have your CT clamps right up here that monitor the incoming and outgoing energy. So if it senses that the grid is gone, the inverter is not going to backfeed this anymore. It's only going to supply power to the critical loads or your sub panel over here. And that's pretty much it. I have a 60 amp circuit breaker over here. The wires from that go over to the grid input. The inverter output goes over to the generator lockout right here, and then I can power my entire house. And another good thing about doing it like that is since we do have this generator lockout right here, if we ever have to do maintenance or anything over there and we have to completely shut everything down and we still want to supply the house with grid power, we can shut that breaker off right here, slide down the lockout, and then turn the power back on, and then you can continue powering your house while you do maintenance or whatever you got to do. All right, that's pretty much how everything is wired over here. I'm not going to go over my little transfer switch over there just so I don't confuse anybody. Boom, it's actually a couple of days later and everything is working out fan-freaking-tastically. As you can see, I did kind of button up everything. I still have a couple things that I need to tidy up, but again, some of this stuff is temporary, at least until the GRIDBOSS is installed. I got the door put on and I got the inside cover put on, and I also hung the little tiny screen on the inside, which I can just show you right now. Boom, got the cover back in and I got the screen mounted, and I did want to make a little mention or a shout out. I was watching Dexter's video for Current Connected. What he actually did for his, which is a fantastic idea, this screw right here, he actually changed out for a longer screw so you could hang the screen right over there, which is way better than what I was gonna do. I was gonna like drill a hole over here so I could hang the screen off to the side, I guess, so you could still see battery off, but you don't really need to do that. You can just get a longer screw for right here, and then you can hang your screen right on that. The only thing I did different than what he did is for the ribbon cable that comes out right here, he ran his over into this little hole right here. I just ran mine behind the screen, and I just ran it right underneath here, underneath the plastic, and it can connect up, you know, to where it normally connects up. Let me turn on the screen. And boom, there we go. Everything is running fan-freaking-tastically. Let's see, we got 2, 2.4, and 3 kilowatt, and we're charging at 6.1 kilowatt. The only thing I guess I wish you could do with this screen is if you could mount it, you know, like out here on the outside. I think that would be really cool to do, because then you won't have to open up the door to see it. But I guess the main thing is you don't have to use a phone or anything like that to actually check or control the inverter. You can just open up the door and use the screen right there. That is the screen. Alrighty, well there you go. Again, everything has been running fan-freaking-tastically. I haven't had any problems at all other than the lack of sunshine. And there is some sun out there today, which I guess I could show you. I don't know if you'd be able to see that. You can see we're doing a little over 8 kilowatt of solar coming in, and we are charging at 6.8 kilowatt, which is not bad. This will go up to, I guess, depending on the time of the year, temperature and all that kind of stuff, it'll go over 12,000 watts, which is what I would rather see. But anyway, I'm going to start wrapping up this video because I'm sure it's gone on long enough. There is one other thing I want to mention real quick is I understand now that I was editing some of the video that a lot of people might not have that little tiny screen and they're not sure all the settings that they need to do because you can't see them and you need to log in through the web portal. I'll just do another quick little video on the web portal part, at least for all the settings that I did, just in case you don't have a screen. Actually, let me know if that would be useful. I know in the video 1 where we went through and updated all the firmware and all that kind of stuff, I think I went over some of those settings, but I don't actually remember. If that would be helpful, let me know and I will make a short video on basically all the settings that you would want to set up. That's only if you're doing, you know, like off-grid type stuff, which is what I'm doing. Even though I do have the grid connected, I try not to use the grid, you know, as much as possible. So if you're doing like grid type stuff, you know, send in stuff back to the grid, stuff like that. I don't have really any experience in that because that's not what I'm doing. But anyway, that's pretty much all I got. It was a pretty easy and straightforward install. Hopefully I was able to give you enough detail and information so you can feel a little more confident in installing an inverter yourself. At least that's what my goal was. And then lastly, one more reminder for those of you that have been thinking about getting a battery backup, a solar system, etc. I'm not trying to put pressure or anything like that. I just don't want you guys to miss out and be like, man, I really should have done that. You know, at this current time in 2025, this is the last year for the 30% tax credit. And again, if you're interested in supporting my channel, I'll have affiliate links and discount codes in the description down below. Alrighty, well that's pretty much all I got. If this video was helpful in any way, make sure you like that smash button on your way out. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see the GRIDBOSS installation, and I'll see you on the next.